I'm Eleanor Hayes, 73 years old, and I sat in my late husband's oak-paneled study that cold November evening, my hands trembling as I looked at my only son. Victor stood by the window, expensive wine glass in hand, waiting for me to finish speaking. "I'm afraid there's nothing left, darling," I said quietly. "The business is gone. The investments failed. I'm broke." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they were true, or at least partly true. Victor turned slowly, and for a moment, I hoped to see concern in his eyes. Instead he smirked. "You broke." He laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed through the house his father built. "That's what you get for never listening to me. All those years I told you to modernize, to invest smarter. But no, you wanted to do things the old-fashioned way." He took a long sip of wine, his eyes cold. "Guess I wasted my time caring about your inheritance." The laughter continued, cutting deeper with each second. I said nothing, just let my gaze drift to the portrait on the wall. My husband Thomas smiled down at me from that portrait, his kind eyes seeming to understand everything, even now, 5 years after his death. I'd loved that man for 47 years, and he'd loved me just as fiercely. Together we'd built a life, raised Victor, created something meaningful. Or so I'd thought. "Well, Mother," Victor said, setting down his glass with a decisive clink. "I suppose this means you'll be moving in with Diane and me. We can clear out the guest room, though I'll have to discuss it with her first. She's not thrilled about the idea." "I wouldn't want to impose," I said softly. "Impose?" He laughed again. "You're 73 and penniless. You don't have a choice." He grabbed his coat from the chair. "I'll call you tomorrow. Try not to sell anything valuable before we talk. What's left might at least cover your final expenses." He walked out without saying goodbye, the front door slamming behind him. I sat in the silence, tears sliding down my cheeks, but not for the reasons Victor thought. The next morning my lawyer, Mr. Graham, arrived right on schedule. Mr. Graham had been Thomas's lawyer and friend for over 30 years. He was a short man with wire-rimmed glasses and an honest face that had never learned to hide his emotions. Today, those emotions were carefully neutral as he set his briefcase on the desk. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "are you certain you want to proceed with this?" He nodded. "Thomas left specific instructions. It's time." We walked together to the old family safe, hidden behind a bookshelf in Thomas's study. The safe had been there since we'd bought the house in 1975, a massive iron thing that required both a key and a combination. I hadn't opened it since Thomas's funeral, when we'd retrieved his will and a few other documents. Now, as Mr. Graham turned the dial with practiced precision, I felt my heart pound. The heavy door swung open with a groan. Mr. Graham reached inside, pulling out the lockbox we'd placed there 5 years ago. But as he lifted it, something else caught his eye. Hidden in the back corner was a sealed envelope I'd never seen before. His face went pale. "Mrs. Hayes," he whispered, "you might want to see this." The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with red wax bearing Thomas's signet ring. In his distinctive handwriting it read, "To be opened upon my death, confidential." My hands shook as I took it from Mr. Graham. "I don't understand," I said. "We went through everything after Thomas died. How could we have missed this?" "It was tucked behind the lockbox," Mr. Graham said, his voice strained. "Deliberately hidden, I'd say. He wanted to make sure it was only found at the right time." I broke the seal carefully, my heart aching with missing my husband. Inside were bank documents, offshore account statements, and a handwritten note addressed to me. Thomas's familiar script swam before my eyes as I read. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray you've lived well in my absence. Inside this envelope, you'll find details of an account I established years ago. It's substantial, but it comes with conditions. If Victor ever forgets who we are, if he loses sight of what truly matters, use this to remind him what's priceless. All my love, Thomas." Mr. Graham adjusted his glasses, reading over my shoulder. Mrs. Hayes, these account numbers. May I? I handed him the documents with trembling fingers. He pulled out his phone, made several calls, spoke in hushed tones with bank representatives. When he finally hung up, his face was ashen. Eleanor, he said, using my first name for the first time in 30 years. This account holds over $4 million. It's been accruing interest for 2 decades. The room spun. $4 million. Thomas had hidden $4 million, and I'd never known. There's more, Mr. Graham continued, flipping through the papers. The money isn't just sitting in a bank. It's held in trust under an organization called the Hayes Foundation. But the foundation appears to be dormant. No activity in years. He showed me another document, this one showing articles of incorporation for the Hayes Foundation, dated 1995. Thomas's signature was at the bottom, along with several names I didn't recognize. What was he planning? I whispered. Mr. Graham's expression was troubled. I don't know. But I think we need to find out before we do anything else. That evening, I dug through old boxes in the attic, searching for anything related to the Hayes Foundation. Dust made me sneeze and the cold made my joints ache, but I couldn't stop. There had to be something, some clue about what Thomas had intended. Finally, in a box labeled 1994, miscellaneous, I found it. A photograph, faded but clear. Thomas stood in front of a building with a sign reading, Mercy Home for Children. Around him were a dozen children, all smiling, all holding certificates. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, Opening Day. The future belongs to those who give back. Tears streamed down my face. I remembered now. In 1994, Thomas had been deeply involved with a local orphanage. He'd spent months volunteering there, had come home with stories about the children, about their dreams and struggles. Then suddenly he'd stopped talking about it. I'd assumed the organization had closed or he'd simply moved on to other interests. But now I understood. He hadn't stopped caring. He'd been planning something bigger. Something that involved $4 million and a foundation that bore our name. The next morning, Victor returned unannounced. I heard his car in the driveway and quickly hid all the documents Mr. Graham and I had found. Whatever Thomas had planned, I knew instinctively that Victor shouldn't know about it yet. Mother, he called out, letting himself in without knocking. We need to talk about the house. He found me in the kitchen making tea. His eyes swept the room with cold assessment. This place is worth at least $800,000 in today's market. Maybe more. We should list it immediately. Victor, this is my home, I said quietly. I've lived here for almost 50 years. And now you're broke, he said bluntly. You can't afford the utilities, let alone the maintenance. It's not yours to keep anymore. He pulled out his phone, already scrolling through real estate agents. I'm thinking we split the proceeds. You'll have enough for a decent assisted living facility. I'll use my half to finally open that restaurant I've been planning. The house isn't yours to sell, I said, keeping my voice calm. Victor looked up, irritation flickering across his face. What's that supposed to mean? It means this house is still mine, and I haven't agreed to sell it. Victor's expression darkened. You're being ridiculous. You just admitted you're broke. How exactly do you plan to keep this place? I'll find a way, I said simply. Find a way. He laughed, that same cruel sound from yesterday. You're 73 years old with no income. Face reality, mother. You done. This is charity now, whether you like it or not. He moved closer, his voice dropping to something cold and hard. Don't make this difficult. I'm trying to help you, even though you clearly don't deserve it after decades of poor decisions. But I'm a good son. I'm willing to take this burden off your shoulders. I met his eyes steadily. You're not taking anything. This conversation is over. Victor's face flushed with anger. He opened his mouth to say something cutting, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he smiled, a thin, calculated expression. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. He stormed out, and I heard his car spray gravel as he sped away. I sank into a chair, my heart pounding. Mr. Graham had warned me that Victor might react badly. But seeing the cold calculation in my son's eyes had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. 3 days later I heard a knock at the door. A man in an expensive suit stood on my porch, holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Hayes. I'm Charles Winston from First National Bank. Your son Victor sent me. I understand you'd like to access your property assets." My stomach dropped. I didn't request any such thing. Charles looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes showed me power of attorney documents signed by you, authorizing him to handle your financial affairs. He said you were having some memory issues and that the documents had been signed last month." "That's a lie," I said sharply. "I never signed any power of attorney. May I come in? Perhaps we can sort this out." Reluctantly, I let him inside. Charles opened his briefcase and showed me documents that looked official and professional. There at the bottom was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. But I'd never seen these papers before in my life. "This is forgery," I said, my voice shaking. "My son forged my signature." Charles shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Hayes, that's a serious accusation. These documents appear legitimate. They were notarized." "By whom?" I demanded. "I'd like to call someone to verify." Charles made the call while I sat rigid with fury. After several tense minutes, he hung up, his face troubled. "The notary confirms meeting with Victor Hayes and a woman he introduced as his mother. But Mrs. Hayes, the description she gave doesn't match you at all. She described someone with red hair, much younger." We stared at each other. Victor had hired someone to impersonate me. My own son had committed fraud to try to steal my house. "I need to call my lawyer," I said quietly. Mr. Graham arrived within the hour. When I showed him the forged documents, his expression turned to stone. "This is criminal fraud. We need to report this immediately." But as we were discussing our options, Mr. Graham noticed Charles looking at something in the study. The banker had wandered over to the safe, which I'd left partially open that morning. "Mrs. Hayes," Charles said slowly, "I don't mean to pry, but is this your family safe?" "Yes," I said warily. "Why?" "Because there appears to be a false bottom." My heart stopped. Mr. Graham and I rushed over. Charles was right. Inside the safe, beneath where the lockbox had sat for years, was a thin seam in the metal. Mr. Graham pulled out his pocket knife and carefully worked the seam. With a soft click, a hidden panel lifted away. Beneath it was a shallow compartment I'd never known existed. Inside lay a small black box, an old brass key, and a folded map of our city. Tucked beside them was another note in Thomas's handwriting, "For the one who values truth over gold." I lifted the black box with trembling hands. It was made of polished ebony, smooth and cold. Inside was a single item, a newer key, this one silver and modern, attached to a small tag with an address. Mr. Graham unfolded the map. It was dated 1994, the same year as the photograph I'd found. Someone had marked a location on the outskirts of town with a red circle and the words, "Mercy Home." "That's the orphanage from the photo," I said. "But that building has been abandoned for years. I drove past it once, maybe 5 years ago. It was all boarded up." Charles, who'd been quietly observing, cleared his throat. "If I may, Mrs. Hayes, that address tag on the key matches the location marked on the map. Perhaps your husband wanted you to go there." The next morning Mr. Graham drove me to the address on the map. The building sat at the edge of town, a 3-story brick structure that had clearly seen better days. Boards covered most of the windows, and weeds grew thick in the yard. A faded sign still hung above the door, "Mercy Home for Children, S. 1987. As we approached, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. "Mrs. Hayes, perhaps we should call the police," Mr. Graham said nervously. "There might be squatters." But something drew me forward. I pushed the door open and we stepped into a dusty lobby. Old furniture sat covered in sheets. Children's drawings still hung on one wall, their colors faded but still visible. "Hello," called out. My voice echoed in the emptiness. Then I heard footsteps above us. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, probably in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes. When she saw me, she gasped. "Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor Hayes." "Yes," I said cautiously. "Who are you?" She came down slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "You came back," she whispered. "After all these years. Your husband said you would. He said one day you'd return for it." The woman introduced herself as Margaret Porter, the last director of Mercy Home before it closed in 2003. "Your husband was our guardian angel," she said, leading us to a small office on the first floor. "When the state funding dried up, Thomas kept us running with private donations. He never wanted recognition, never asked for anything in return. He just believed in giving children a chance." She pulled out an old lockbox from beneath a dust-covered desk. "Before he died, Thomas came here one last time. He knew he was sick. He left this and made me promise to give it to you personally when you came looking." My hands shook as she handed me the box. Inside were more documents, but these were different. Property deeds. 3 of them, all for parcels of land in what was now the city's downtown district. All dated 1993. All listing Eleanor Hayes as the sole owner. "I don't understand," I whispered. "How is this possible?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Your husband bought this land when it was worthless, nothing but empty lots in a rundown part of town. But he had vision. He knew the city would expand, that eventually this area would be valuable. He put everything in your name to protect it." Mr. Graham took the deeds with shaking hands, pulling out his phone to verify the properties. After several calls, he looked at me with something close to shock. "Eleanor, this land is worth at least $12 million. Maybe more. Prime commercial real estate in the heart of downtown." I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Thomas had done this. All those years ago, he'd invested in our future, in my security, and I'd never known. But why keep it secret? I finally asked Margaret. She settled into an old chair, dust rising around her. "He was protecting you from Victor. Thomas loved his son, but he wasn't blind to his faults. He knew Victor would see this as money to be spent, wealth to be flaunted. Thomas wanted you to have security, yes, but more than that, he wanted you to have purpose." She gestured around the abandoned building. "This orphanage closed because we couldn't afford the upkeep after Thomas died. But the land it sits on, the building itself, it's all part of what he left you. He hoped you'd find a way to bring it back to life." Suddenly, the Hayes Foundation made sense. The $4 million in the bank, the land holdings, even this building. Thomas hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a mission. I spent the next week making plans with Mr. Graham and Margaret. We'd revive the Hayes Foundation, use the money Thomas had set aside to restore Mercy Home, and create new programs for foster children. The land holdings would provide ongoing income to sustain it all. But then Victor returned. He showed up at my door with a new lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Cross. "Mother," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I've been worried about you. Patricia here has helped me file a petition for conservatorship. We're concerned you're not mentally competent to handle your affairs." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Patricia stepped forward, all business. "Mrs. Hayes, your son has documented several incidents of concerning behavior. Confusion about finances, paranoid accusations of forgery, claims about hidden money that don't exist. We believe you need help managing your affairs." "This is ridiculous," I said, but my voice shook. "I'm perfectly competent." "Then perhaps you won't mind meeting with a court-appointed psychiatrist," Patricia said smoothly. "It's just a formality. If you're truly fine as you claim, you have nothing to worry about." Victor smirked behind her, and I understood. This was his revenge for refusing to sell the house. He was going to have me declared incompetent, seize control of everything. The psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for the following week. Victor's lawyer had moved fast, filing paperwork and getting a hearing date with alarming speed. I met with Mr. Graham in a panic. "He's going to take everything," I said. "Even if I show the psychiatrist I'm perfectly competent, Victor will find a way to twist it." Mr. Graham was quiet for a long moment, then he smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile in weeks. "Eleanor, I think it's time we let Victor think he's won." "What do you mean?" "The conservatorship hearing is in 3 days. That gives us just enough time to prepare a surprise. Trust me." I didn't understand his plan, but I trusted him. For the next 3 days we prepared in secret. Mr. Graham made calls, filed paperwork, contacted people I'd never met. Margaret came to stay with me, providing both company and moral support. The day of the hearing arrived. Victor looked smugly confident as we entered the courtroom. His lawyer presented her case first, painting me as a confused old woman who'd made wild accusations and couldn't manage her own finances. Then it was our turn. Mr. Graham stood, his usually gentle demeanor replaced with something sharp and precise. "Your Honor," Mr. Graham began, "I'd like to submit evidence that this petition for conservatorship is not motivated by concern for Mrs. Hayes's welfare, but by greed." He presented the forged power of attorney documents, along with testimony from the notary who'd admitted Victor had brought an imposter. The petitioner, Victor Hayes, attempted to commit fraud by forging his mother's signature. When that failed, he filed this conservatorship petition to achieve the same goal: control over his mother's assets. The judge's expression darkened as she reviewed the documents. Victor's lawyer tried to object, but Mr. Graham wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'd like to present evidence of Mrs. Hayes's actual financial situation, which directly contradicts the claims made by the petitioner." He handed up the property deeds, the Hayes Foundation documents, the bank statements showing $4 million. Victor's face went white as the judge examined each page. "Mrs. Hayes is not broke, as her son claimed. She has substantial assets. Assets that her son Victor attempted to access through fraud and manipulation." The judge looked at Victor with open disgust. "Mr. Hayes, I'm denying this petition and referring this case to the district attorney for investigation of fraud." Court adjourned. I thought that would be the end of it. The judge had ruled Victor's scheme had been exposed, and I could finally move forward with restoring Mercy home. But I'd underestimated my son's desperation. 2 days after the hearing, the story broke. A local newspaper ran a front-page article: "Businessman's son disinherited after fraud attempt." The article detailed everything: the forged documents, the failed conservatorship petition, the hidden assets Victor had tried to steal. Mr. Graham had leaked it. He admitted to me later, because he wanted to protect me from future attempts. If Victor's reputation was destroyed, he couldn't manipulate people into helping him hurt me. But the consequences were swift and brutal. Victor's business partners saw the article and pulled out of deals. The restaurant he'd been planning fell apart when investors withdrew. His friends stopped calling. His wife Diane filed for separation, embarrassed by the scandal. 3 days after the article ran, Victor called me. His voice was broken, desperate. "Mom, please. You have to help me. I've lost everything. My business, my marriage, my reputation. I need money. Just enough to start over." I listened to him beg, this man who'd laughed at my supposed poverty, who'd tried to steal my home, who'd attempted to have me declared incompetent. "Victor," I said quietly, "I want you to understand something. Your father left me those assets not just for my security, but as a test. He wanted to see what kind of person you'd become when faced with wealth you couldn't have." "A test?" Victor's voice was bitter. "That's sick, Mother. You're both sick. We loved you," I said, tears in my eyes. "We gave you everything. But love isn't the same as enabling. Your father saw something in you that scared him, a willingness to value money over people, over family. He hoped you'd prove him wrong. And you just went along with it." Victor shouted. You let him play games with my life. I didn't know about any of it until after you laughed at my poverty, I said. Until you made it clear that you only valued me for what I could give you. That's when I understood what Thomas had been trying to teach us both. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, "So what now? You're going to leave me with nothing." "I'm going to do what your father wanted," I said. "I'm going to rebuild Mercy Home. I'm going to help children who've lost everything, the way you should have helped me." That evening, a young woman knocked on my door. She was probably in her early 30s, with dark hair and nervous energy. "Mrs. Hayes. My name is Anna Rodriguez. I hope I'm not intruding, but I heard about what you're planning to do with Mercy Home." She showed me a faded photograph, the same one I'd found in my attic. There she was, a little girl of maybe 8, standing next to Thomas. "Your husband sponsored me when I was a child," Anna said, tears in her eyes. "I was at Mercy Home from age 7 to 16. Mr. Hayes paid for my education, mentored me, believed in me when no one else did. He told me that one day I'd meet someone who believed in second chances." He pulled out a folder. "I've spent the last 10 years building a non-profit organization focused on supporting foster children. I've been looking for a partner, someone who understands the mission. When I heard about your plans, I knew. This is what Mr. Hayes was preparing for." I invited her in and we talked for hours. Anna's organization was exactly what Thomas would have wanted. Practical, focused, making real differences in children's lives. Together we could do even more. Over the next month, Anna and I worked together to create a plan. We'd restore Mercy Home as the flagship location of her organization, using the Hayes Foundation's resources to expand programs across the state. The property holdings would provide sustainable income for decades to come. But Victor wasn't done fighting. On the day we were scheduled to sign the final paperwork transferring the Hayes Foundation assets to the new Mercy Foundation, Victor filed a lawsuit. His claim was simple but devastating. As Thomas's only child, he had a right to contest any changes to his inheritance. Patricia Cross, apparently still willing to take his money despite the scandal, argued that the Hayes Foundation was meant to benefit the family, not strangers. The lawsuit froze all the assets, stopping our plans cold. Mr. Graham assured me we'd win eventually, but it could take years. Years those children didn't have. "There's one thing we can do," Mr. Graham said reluctantly. "You could update your own will, make your intentions explicitly clear. If something happened to you before the lawsuit is resolved, the court would be forced to honor your stated wishes rather than Victor's claims." I knew what he was saying. I needed to make sure that even if I died, Victor couldn't win. I spent the next week working with Mr. Graham on my new will. It was thorough and specific. To my son Victor, I leave the lessons his father and I tried to teach him. That love matters more than money, that family is measured in loyalty, not in inheritance, and that true wealth lies in what you give, not what you keep. To the world, through the Mercy Foundation, I leave everything else. But writing the will took more out of me than I expected. The stress of the past months, the betrayal, the fighting, it all caught up with me at once. One morning I simply couldn't get out of bed. Margaret found me there, confused and weak. The hospital diagnosed me with severe exhaustion and dehydration. My blood pressure was dangerously high. The doctor said I'd been running on adrenaline for weeks, and my body had finally given out. They wanted to keep me for observation. As I lay in that hospital bed, Victor appeared in the doorway. He looked terrible, unshaven, his clothes rumpled, his eyes red. "Mom," he said, and for the first time in months, his voice cracked with genuine emotion. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." He sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "I just wanted you to be proud of me," Victor said, staring at his hands. "My whole life you and Dad were so perfect. The successful business, the charitable work, the respect of everyone who knew you. And I was just Victor, the son who could never measure up." Tears ran down his face. "When I found out you were broke, part of me was relieved. Finally you needed me. Finally I could be the strong one, the one who solved the problems. But then you didn't need me. You never needed me. And I couldn't handle it. I reached out with a trembling hand and touched his face. Victor, we always needed you. We just needed you to be yourself, not some version of what you thought we wanted. I don't know who that is anymore, he whispered. We sat in silence for a while. Then Victor said, the lawsuit. I'll drop it. I'll sign whatever you want. Just please, please forgive me. I looked at my son, this broken man who'd caused so much pain, and I saw the little boy he'd been. The child who'd run to me with scraped knees, who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd once told me I was the best mom in the world. I forgive you, I said. I always have. I was discharged from the hospital 3 days later, weak but recovering. True to his word, Victor dropped the lawsuit. He signed documents giving up any claim to the Hayes Foundation assets. Mr. Graham presented me with the finalized paperwork for the Mercy Foundation. Everything was ready, but I made one more change. I asked Mr. Graham to add a clause to the foundation's charter. If Victor ever wanted to be involved, if he truly wanted to help, the door would always be open. 2 weeks later we held my funeral. I'm sorry, I should clarify. We held the funeral for the old Eleanor Hayes, the scared woman who'd let her son's cruelty hurt her. The real funeral was my rebirth. Margaret, Anna, Mr. Graham, and surprisingly Victor, all gathered at my house for the final reading of my will. This is irregular, Mr. Graham said with a slight smile. Usually the person whose will is being read isn't present for it. But Mrs. Hayes insisted. He opened the envelope dramatically. To my beloved son Victor, he read. I leave you the family home on the condition that it be used to house and support Mercy Foundation staff and visiting families. I leave you my love, which you never lost, even when you thought you had. And I leave you a choice, to be part of something meaningful or to walk away. Victor stood there, tears streaming down his face, staring at the words Mr. Graham had read. A choice, he repeated. After everything I did, you're giving me a choice? That's what love does, I said quietly. It keeps choosing hope. Mr. Graham cleared his throat and continued. And to Ana Rodriguez, whom I am proud to call my daughter through the legal adoption finalized this morning, I leave the role of Executive Director of the Mercy Foundation, along with all assets needed to fulfill that role. Ana gasped. I'd told her about the adoption privately, but hearing it officially made it real. Through a legal clause I'd had Mr. Graham draft weeks ago, Anna was now legally my daughter and heir. Not to replace Victor, but to ensure the foundation's future. This belongs to the one who carries love, not greed, Mr. Graham read from the will. He produced a diamond-encrusted locket that had belonged to my mother. Inside was a photograph I'd placed there just yesterday. Thomas, me, and a little girl who looked remarkably like Anna. She found me, Anna whispered, opening the locket. And she gave me everything money can't buy. 6 months later, I stood at the grand reopening of Mercy Home. The building had been beautifully restored, filled with light and laughter. Children ran through halls that had been silent for too long. Anna stood beside me as the executive director. Her vision finally realized. And Victor stood on my other side. He'd spent the past months working with the foundation, quietly, without recognition. He'd learned carpentry to help with the renovations. He'd organized fundraisers. He'd apologized to every person he'd hurt. As the ribbon was cut and the crowd cheered, I saw Thomas's portrait being unveiled inside. Beneath it, engraved in stone, true wealth lies in what you give, not what you keep. I felt Victor's hand slip into mine. Thank you, Mom, he said quietly, for not giving up on me. I squeezed his hand and smiled. That's what family does. The sun was setting as the celebration continued, casting golden light across the faces of children who now had hope, of staff who believed in second chances, of a son who'd finally learned what truly mattered. Thomas had been right all along. The safe had held exactly what we needed. Not money, though that helped. Not property, though it provided security. But a test of character, a chance for redemption, and a reminder that love, real love, never gives up even when it would be easier to walk away.